Hi there, writers. Today we're going to talk about the thesis statement for paper number 3. And the reason why we're talking about the thesis statement right now is that it will appear on the top of your annotated bibliography, and that will give you sort of a sense of where you're going with the sources that you're looking for. It'll help you and me determine whether the sources are going to work for your paper. So I just pulled up the student sample annotated bibliography. So if you click this open, you'll see this is a full annotated bibliography for you to just sort of have the overall vision of what this will look like. And the thesis is right up here. So it will be a working thesis. You'll label it a working thesis. I won't be grading you on the quality of that thesis for your annotated bibliography, but you do want to have it, as good as possible for the moment, knowing that you may change it as you start to work on your paper, because I'll be able to give you feedback on your thesis at that point, even before you start to write the paper, which can be really helpful. So let's talk about sort of the structure of this paper, the goals of this paper, and then what the thesis needs to look like to make this paper work and to include all the component parts of the paper. So this is a problem solution paper. So you're going to be delving into the issue or the problem that you've identified, as well as some potential solutions or responses. So your thesis then needs to capture both of those component parts, the problem and the solution. So you've got several tasks in this big paper number 3 to make an argument in response to the problem. So you're identifying a problem and then you're making an argument about that problem. Provide details on the causes and effects of this problem, because part of your goal is to give your audience a really in-depth understanding of the issue and why it's such a big issue. In other words, what are the negative effects of that problem? Propose a viable solution or steps toward positive change. So what can be done about this issue? What should be being done about this issue? And then persuade your audience to take action. So what can people who read this paper, people who are just learning about this issue, what should they do if they care? So the paper structure then, and I want to give you a rundown of the different sections of this paper, the different tasks that you need to do. One reason, of course, is that your thesis needs to reflect the overall paper, but also because you're still in the research phase, and this can help you figure out what types of sources you'll need, because you will need sources for the sections of this paper. All right, so of course you'll have an introduction that engages the reader and provides some context of the problem. So you could do sort of a poetic introduction where you provide someone specific, a specific story and narrative about someone who's been impacted by this issue. You could maybe describe the issue or a scene from the issue, give a relevant recent news story related to the issue. You could do a philosophical type of intro where you give a philosophical pondering of a specific type of concept, such as, the importance of protecting the environment, something like that, right? Or you could do a practical intro where you provide some startling statistics, you give background information that's going to be engaging to your reader. And of course, you'll present your thesis there too. Then probably early in the paper, you're going to have a section detailing the causes of the problem, like what is leading to this, where did this come from, why is this an issue, where did it start, who's responsible, and keep in mind that this, although it's labeled section 2, is not just going to be one paragraph. This section could be a couple paragraphs. This section could be a page or two, depending on the complexity and the type of problem. Section number 3 is proving that the problem exists. So how bad a problem is it? And that it's having significant effects. So in other words, prove that it's actually a big problem worth doing something about. Different deleterious effects, negative effects on people, the economy, the environment, effects of effects, right? So again, this section will probably be several paragraphs. In fact, this section will probably be the bulk of your paper. Of course, you're going to propose a solution or an appropriate response. What are people already doing about this? What is the government already doing about this? What do we need to do further? Are those things working? What can individual people do? And at some point in the paper, you also need some sort of opposing viewpoint. Now, it doesn't have to go right here, because you probably want to consider opposing viewpoints as you go throughout the paper. So, for example, in the causes section, maybe there's some disagreement about what the main cause of your issue is. If there is, your counterclaim stuff could come here because that's the part that's the most complex. Like people are disagreeing about what's causing this issue. And you want to give a fully well-rounded look at the issue. And so you need to acknowledge and entertain opposing perspectives on this causes thing. So somebody asked, for example, in one of the classes, well, what about neo-Nazism? I don't want to say, some people think neo-Nazism is cool, and they have a great point about that. Like, you don't want to say that in your paper. You don't want to entertain that type of ideology. But people might disagree about what the causes of neo-Nazism are, in which case that is where a lot of your counterclaim work could make. Maybe you think it's one cause, but you want to entertain that there's some other perspectives on what that cause might be. Of course, you'll also have a conclusion that illustrates the significance of the issue and includes some sort of call to action. Here's what you, people reading this paper, should do. And also, this paper is a little bit persuasive, especially towards the end, so you are trying to compel your readers to go forth and do something differently. All right, so your thesis statement then is going to be a pretty complex thesis statement to take into consideration all these different parts of the paper. So you're going to have what, why, so what, and who probably represented in this thesis. So what position are you taking on the issue? And why are you taking that position? So what is your overall reasoning in support of that argument? So what should happen, or why is this extremely significant? And then who needs to know this, or who do you want to take action? So let me show you some examples. I've got sort of a color-coded representation of each of these component parts of the thesis. And let's say my overall problem I was identifying is cyberbullying is harmful and needs to be stopped. Okay. Now we talked about this as sort of an over-obvious topic, but I'm just using it as an example to show you what a thesis might look like. Cyberbullying is harmful and needs to be stopped. So here's a thesis that's more complex than just that basic problem statement. Since too many children suffer the long-term emotional effects of cyberbullying, school leaders need to implement more comprehensive anti-bullying educational programs and curriculum. So you can see here in yellow, I've identified the issue, the problem, and my stance on it. Too many children suffer from it. The effects of the problem are identified here, long-term emotional effects. Then we have a sense of audience, school leaders need to, and a sense of purpose. What do you want to happen? Or the proposed solution. They need to implement more comprehensive anti-bullying educational programs and curriculum. Here's another example. College students from rural backgrounds face lots of unique challenges that make college harder for them than people realize. So again, that's a basic statement of my problem. So as you're working on your thesis, if you have a little notebook handy, the first thing I would write is an identification of your problem and what makes it a problem. So sort of the problem and the effects of that problem. And then we're going to make it a little more complex to address the unique academic and social challenges of first-generation college students from rural backgrounds and ensure an equitable educational experience. Universities should, so there's my should or need to, right? A statement of my audience. Provide professors with professional development on how to change instruction and policies to meet these students' needs. So what do you want to happen? What is your solution? So that's the key here. You have a phrase that represents the problem. You have a phrase that represents the solution. And then you have like a should phrase, right? Where you're identifying who or whom you want to act or who should be responsible for responding to this problem. That's going to give you a good complex thesis that represents all the component parts of your paper. Here's another one from the student sample annotated bibliography, actually. Although many people have access to clean water, millions of people in the United States do not. So the government needs to make clean and safe running water more accessible to everyone, and more people need to be informed on this serious issue. I lied, this is not from the student sample annotated bibliography, but it's got the component parts represented. So the problem, millions of people in the US do not have good water. And the solution, the government needs to make this more accessible to everyone. And this is a double solution. More people need to be informed on this serious issue. So we have two possible audiences identified in this one. Here's another example. Although there is a looming global pilot shortage, the aviation industry, government agencies around the world, and the public must formally acknowledge the issue and present a plan to recruit and train more pilots to avert a global crisis. So this one again identifies a problem, a global pilot shortage. It identifies who needs to be aware and act, and like the solution, we need to be making a plan to recruit and train more pilots. We also have a sense of significance. Why does this matter? Because it could be a global crisis if we do not address this problem. So that's the why does this matter, the why, and the so what type of thing. So again, keep the structure of this paper in mind because you need sources on the causes of this problem. You need sources that prove that this problem is significant, having significant impacts on a significant portion of the population or whatever. You need sources to help you propose a solution or response. And you need sources that complexify any of these other previous sections. People who say no, those aren't really the causes. Here's what they are. People who say those effects aren't really what we need to be worried about. And here are the real effects of this. Or people who say that solution is not going to work. We need to do this instead. So sources that help you define the viewpoints. And I also want you to have some people in here, some specific people. So a story, a narrative of somebody who has been personally impacted by this issue. So look for that in your research as well. And then of course we need to keep in mind all of these sections need to be represented because you're going to have in your thesis a phrase to help you define the problem and a phrase to help you define the solution because this is a problem solution paper. So there you go. You want that thesis to be on the top of your annotated bibliography.